Hello, class. Much of the communicating that we do is part of interpersonal communication. Has to do with communication that we have with ourselves. That is information that we process inside before we ever even open our mouths. Today we'll be looking at patterns that people learn in their family of origin that may affect the way humans communicate with others. This means, for example, how people are taught to interrelate with their own family. I'd like to introduce you to someone who can help you identify the patterns of your family that you repeat, positive or negative, and what you need to do about them. Our guest lecturer today is my husband, Dr. Emmett Roberts.
My name is Emmett Roberts, Dr. Emmett Roberts. I have a PhD in social work from the University of Texas at Arlington. I also have a master's degree and a bachelor's in social work from the University of Oklahoma in Norman. As you probably have noticed, I am married to your professor, your instructor, Dr. Myrna Roberts. So we are the house of a paradox. Myrna and I would talk, Dr. Roberts and I were talking about communication. I told her, I said, that sounds a lot what you're talking about, universal communication, about Bowenian family theories. Well, Murray Bowen is a psychiatrist who started out doing treatment and research on schizophrenia. And so, of course, like many things that happen for me, because I'm a clinical social worker, I have a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Oklahoma, also a licensed alcohol and drug counselor for the state of Oklahoma, as well as I teach. I'm a core faculty member at Walden University. So anyway, I do this stuff for a living, and as far as interacting and communication and dysfunctional interactional patterns and all things. So as we were talking, and it's like, that sounds like Bowenian family theory, as I said before, and start talking about Murray. Murray was trying to figure out what causes schizophrenia. So again, like people in the past, it had to be the mama's fault. It had to be something about the interaction between the mother and their child. And so Dr. Bowen started his research and his work at in Topeka, Kansas, at Menninger's Hospital, which is now in Houston, Texas. And what Murray came up with was his own family theory, how to work with families. And he talked about it being systemic. So an adjustment in one part of the system will impact other parts of the system. So you just can't do one thing and then it'd be fine. It will throw the whole system out of whack and then it has to readjust. So Murray came up with these 8 concepts. There are 8 concepts. The first is triangles. Second is differentiation of self. The third one is nuclear family emotional processes. The fourth is family projection process. Fifth is multi-generational transmission process. The sixth is emotional cutoffs. 7 is sibling position, and 8 is societal emotional processes. Real quickly go through these. Murray says that the most stable relationship that there is a triangle. Most people would think about, it's probably a dyad or a couple. But Murray says that there's so much going on in interaction, in dealing with each other in a couple, that you have to have a safety valve. There has to be another person involved that can kind of relieve the stress off the couple. So Murray says that not 2, but 3 people make the most stable relationships. Number 2, differentiation of self. Murray says that part of what we need to do as people, we come from a family and we belong to a family, but we also have to figure out where the family ends and where we begin. And that's differentiation. That is, I'm part of, but I'm also separate. The third thing is nuclear family emotional processes. And it talks about, I guess you could say, dysfunctional patterns in the family. So it could be, Murray said there are four things that you find. You find marital conflict, you find dysfunction in a parent, in a spouse, you find some kind of impairment or dysfunction in a child, and then some kind of emotional disturbance in one of the people. I'm going somewhere, so stay with me. The fourth thing is family projection process. What's that about? That's about the family or the members of the family start having issues that they can't deal with, and so their inability to deal with it, they take all of that stuff and project it on a person, and usually it's a child in the family. So it's not the child that's sick per se, it's the family that's sick, but the only way they can handle it is saying something's wrong with little Bobby or something's wrong with little Susie, so we need to get them some help because there's something wrong with them. Fifth, multi-generational process is one of the things I love about Murray. Murray says that every family, if you will, has business that it has to conduct. It has to complete. And so if the family doesn't complete the business in one generation, then it will fall to the next generation to complete that business. And if it doesn't happen in that generation, then it happens in the next, and next, and next. So sometimes in using Bowenian family systems theory, we say, it's not your fault. Actually, it's your great-grandfather's fault because he had some stuff going on in his family that he couldn't figure out. And so it's been left undone every generation until it's got to you. And now it's your job to fix it so that the family can move on. Some people say that when you start talking about multi-generational stuff, you're talking about family curses. That's not the way I look at it. But it is, to the third and fourth generation. Same thing. It didn't get finished in the first generation. It didn't get finished in the second generation. It didn't get finished in the third generation. And finally, somebody in the fourth generation figures out what that's like. Prime example. I am the adult child of an alcoholic. Who was the adult child of an alcoholic? Who was the adult child of an alcoholic? Who I'm guessing was the adult child of an alcoholic. So alcohol and my family's does some real weird things, even in the interaction of us all. And I don't drink. I just don't. I got other issues, but drinking is not one of them. So that was not a way that I figured out how to deal with stress and all those kind of things. So some people could say that for our family has kind of kiboshed with me because my sister also doesn't drink. Emotional cutoffs. One of the things that Murray says again in this interaction in this thing we call family is that business has to be finished. If it doesn't get finished, it causes issues. So when you start talking about emotional cutoffs, you have those people who disappear. I was telling my wife, Dr. Roberts, that I was 13 years old when I found out that my father was not the baby in his family, that he actually has a younger sibling who's like 3 years younger than he is. Had no clue until one day we were at my paternal grandfather's house, and he drove up and somebody said, "That looked like Sanford." And I looked at my mom and I said, "What is Uncle Sanford doing here?" Because she has a brother named Uncle Sanford. She said, "Not my brother, your father's brother." I said, "Well, my father doesn't have a brother named Sanford." She said, "Yes, he does." I said, "Well, come on, I don't know nothing about it." Well, some stuff happened. My uncle left home at 17, didn't come home for 25 years. The other interesting part about that is, although he didn't come home for 25 years, he lived next door to his brother, my uncle, who I knew, who came home from California at least 2 times a year. Who would have thought? But there was a cutoff. And all the members of the family didn't interact with my Uncle Sanford, just my Uncle George, who lived next door to him, Uncle George. 7, Murray says in this systemic thing, where you come in, where you're born, has an effect on who you will become as a person. So, those things like we expect certain things from the oldest child. Everybody says that the oldest child is the one who's better able to take care of business, who's the most responsible, and that babies are spoiled. Well, maybe not. But Murray says that where you come in and how you fit in a family, because all families have roles. All families have expectations of each of the members of their family, each member of the family. So Murray says that has a big issue to figure out who you are. And last but not least, societal emotional processes. Well, this one goes back to the number 3, the nuclear family emotional processes. It's the same thing, those same expectations, but instead of being put on you by your family, it's the society at large who has these expectations of your behavior, who you're going to be, and how you're going to interact, and all of those kind of things. So it's not the parents that are putting stuff on you, it's actually the society that's putting stuff on you. Okay, so how does all of this impact or is affected in interpersonal communications? I'm going to guess that part of the issue is as far as its expectations, how they, because in my line of work, it's about expectations. It's about what people expect you to do, what your role is in the family, and how people interact with you. So expectations in direct interaction, in communication, if you will, about who you are and who you'll become and all of that. So Dr. Roberts also wanted me to talk to you about the Genogram. And Genogram is a real funny thing that Murray came up with, something that I use pretty much in all my clinical work. Even if I don't physically make one, I make one in my head because it makes sense to me. The Genogram is like a family tree, except you can put a lot more information on. So somewhere Dr. Roberts will come up with an example of what a genogram looks like. And so the boxes are males and the circles are females. And so there are lines that connect them. And then there is also instruction about what those lines mean. Like a solid line means marriage. A dotted line means that there was a relationship that's not marriage. So between those two people, then there are lines for the next generation that you will put all children. Then you can put those children as they become adults, their spouses, and their children. On a genogram, you record things like birthdays. Well, we start out with names, birthdays, days of death, and anything like marriages, divorces, any kind of days that are important in the life of a family. You put down there are symbols for adoptions. There are symbols as we've moved into the 21st century. There are even things like if a person is transgender. So they were born with a set of body parts that do not fit for who the person is on the inside and how they experience the world. And so you make all those connections. Excuse me. You can find out all sorts of interesting things like genograms. Like a lot of things that come out is that people start having problems around anniversary dates, really important things. Somebody starts having problems when there is the anniversary of a death. Certain things like you'll find out people will be named after somebody in a family who may have died as a child. So when you come in, unbeknownst to you, there may be all sorts of expectations that are imposed on you that you don't even know anything about. But the system knows and is aware of the expectations. And so genograms are real good ways of figuring that thing out and how people are related to people. Also all sorts of relationship, who has a good relationship, who has a bad relationship, who's cut off on a relationship, who's been fighting and who they've been fighting with for how long, who's really, really close, maybe too close, All of those, you can put all of that information on the Genogram. And it's just a big picture to kind of let you know how the people in a family are interacting with each other and how they get along with each other.
Okay, so here's the question that you prompted me to ask. Like, if you come from a family that has very strong men, but weak women, then what does that mean? What could that be?
It can mean a whole lot of things. One of the things it could be is that the system is set up where it accommodates whatever, how you define strong men. Men are supposed to be strong and women are supposed to be weak or weaker than me. And so from a systems point of view, the system starts to look for women and men who fit the mold that the system expects. So you will find things like, I always use my family because I understand my family. My grandmother had some real expectations about who could be part of her family. And so this is my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother. And so my grandmother had no qualms whatsoever about if she didn't think somebody fit her family, then it wasn't she was trying to sabotage. She would just go all out. It's like, nah, that one is not gonna fit. They don't belong in our family. They don't think like we do. And so there's things within the system that to support those things occurring. Like I said, I come from, I'll flip that over. My father's an alcoholic. Well, my father's dead now, but my father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My father had 7 brothers. I think there was 7 boys and 2 girls. I think that's what it was. All the boys had problems with alcohol. All of them except for one was alcoholic. The other one just got into some abusive drinking behavior, but I'm not sure that he was alcoholic. My mother is one of 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. All 6 of the girls in my mom's family all married alcoholics. And the oldest 2 got married twice, and both times they married alcoholics. Well, kind of weird. What would you expect? But my grandfather was a bootlegger. So my mother's family has real interesting relationship, if you will, with alcohol. My father's family has real interesting relationship with alcohol.
The next question that you prompted me to ask is, like, if you come from a family that teaches that children should be seen and not heard, then that would affect the way you treat children in general, or your children?
Of course, probably the way that you treat children in general, but definitely the way that you treat your children. The other thing about all of this that's real interesting too is that sometimes, just as Bowen talks about things like family emotional cutoffs, is that sometimes your reaction to what happens in your family will be, and you don't even think about it, but it's the direct opposite of what you were taught. So, people say, well, they're just doing what they were taught. Well, yeah, but you could also be doing the exact opposite of what you've been taught, because there was a decision that on some level, somewhere in you, that you made. So you'll find people in the same family that come from extremes. So, you'll find people who, like in my family, you'll find people who drink or have issues with drink, alcoholic, and you find people who don't drink, but who may be vehemently opposed to drinking. So it's like, how you gonna come into a family and you got alcoholics on one end and people who fight against there shouldn't be alcohol made. So it happens both ways. So you could have somebody who would have lots of expectations from children in their same family with somebody who chooses to have no expectations for children. So you have children who sit in the corner and do absolutely nothing unless they're told. And you have children who jump in the same family who jump off the walls. One is just like this and the other one is like this.
Keep in mind that this is about communication and not family systems therapy. But know that the Bowenian theory has been applied in the field of communication many, many times. Also, the terms communicate, interrelate, and interact are interchangeable. Don't just take the history that you've already got talk to people and ask questions. This is an exercise about finding out how you became who you are and who added to that. This exercise may unleash unresolved feelings and history, so be aware of that. Do you have something to say about that, Doc?
You know, especially if you're doing a genogram, you may unearth things that you may find that you have an uncle who's been missing for 25 years. And so, you know, be prepared or have resources to be able to address those things. Because, you know, you go start stirring around and stuff, you might find out stuff that people don't want you to know. Which again, tells you something about who you are and where you come from.
Exactly, because this is an interpersonal communication class. And so you probably need to know more about who you are interpersonally before you end up projecting on other people.
Awesome.
Amen. I'm out.
Bye.